Hello everyone, welcome back to My Hero Academia Podfics. Today will be the continuation of Burn Your Wings. This will be Part 6, Chapter 6, entitled Turntables. The students left near the entrance of the USJ are in disarray. With no teacher, no leader, no Midoriya, no one has any idea what to do. No, 13 is still breathing, but they're not responding to me, Ashido calls from the hero's side, with tears in her eyes. Sarah looks around nervously with Sato. The warp guy isn't here anymore. Should we evacuate? Or should we try to find the others? I don't know. Deku would. A small voice whispers to Uraraka in her mind. But he's not here. Another voice furiously snaps back. Uraraka bites her lip to keep in a sob. Ever since the teachers have been out of commission, Midoriya had been guiding them, whether he knew it or not. Everyone had followed his lead without question, even all the usually independent or headstrong people as well. Midoriya had been the one to instantly come up with a plan and to direct them. His calmness had soothed everyone's panic. His quick thinking had assured everyone's doubts. His strength against the villain had given everyone hope. He had saved everyone here, and they couldn't save him. "You'll be too busy with me," Midoriya had told the warp villain. "No," Uraraka had said, both to the villain and Midoriya. "You'll be too busy with us." But in the end, despite all her pretty words, that's not what happened, is it? All of them knew from the quirk assessment test and the battle simulation that Midoriya's quirk had a crippling side effect. All of them saw how taxing it was for him to keep tossing around the warp villain to disorient him, and yet none of them could do anything to help him. She couldn't do anything to help him. Uraraka's teeth sink deeper into her lip. "I found him!" Shoji bursts out, and everyone instantly stills and turns to him. Uraraka can see the desperate hope and fear she herself feels reflected on everyone else's face. Shoji's tentacle-like arms are spread wide like a radio dish, ears and eyes on the ends, tense with concentration. Midoriya is down in the central plaza with the warp villain and someone else. I think it's their leader. It's the guy that was talking about killing us. They all exchange a fearful look at that. No, not Midoriya. Please, not Midoriya. They need him. They can't. But then something explodes. Uraraka whips to turn to the plaza. A column of fire is blazing in the center, so bright and intense that she can't make out what's going on or who's making the fire. It roars like a fiery dragon, clawing its way up to the sky, furious and awe-striking in its ethereal rage. A tremble goes down Uraraka's spine as the pillar of flames blaze away where she knows her friend is. Deku. Shigaraki and Kurogiri jump back as they shield their eyes against the blazing light and whipping wind. The pair watch in almost awestruck silence for a moment as the intensity of the flames completely obscures the kid from sight. The sight is terrible in its brilliance. "Is that how he got under your skin?" Shigaraki asks Kurogiri. "No," the warp villain answers, his misty form flickering in unease and surprise. "I didn't even know that fire is part of his quirk." "This is a cheat," Shigaraki hisses, narrowing his eyes against the glare. "What is this, Phase 2? This kid isn't even a boss." His gaming jargon seems to be lost on the older villain, but the sentiment is still shared. Just then the fire dies down, the flames recede back into the kid, only little flickers running up and down his skin. The light throws his previously soft features into sharp relief and gives his green eyes a strange glint. The white mask that had been over the kid's lower face is charred and smoking. He raises one hand to lift it off his face and lower the mangled mess to his collarbone. His eyes seem to be fixated on Nomu and Eraserhead before they slowly shift to Shigaraki. "Step away from him," he says softly, and somehow his voice carries with an uncanny clarity. His words are pointed to Nomu, but they're addressing Shigaraki, those fiery green eyes boring into the villain. It's as if he's already figured out that Nomu only takes orders from Shigaraki in the short time he's been here. "If you want to play a game, then fine, let's play, but leave him out of it." Shigaraki pauses, then smiles eerily. "So the kid cares about Eraserhead, huh?" "I don't think I will. It's more exciting when the stakes are higher, no?" He points a finger at Eraserhead. "Nomu." But before he can get an order out, the kid reaches out a hand towards him and makes a sharp pulling gesture. Shigaraki is yanked forward, stumbling and choking on his words. The force itself isn't very strong, but it's just enough to unbalance him and cut him off. Shigaraki raises his head and looks at the kid with a murderous glare. He kind of sees why even Kurogiri got pissed at this kid. The kid bares his teeth in a grin. "Just you and me, Shigaraki. Let's play." He cocks his head. "Or are you not game?" And oh, if you put it that way. He's not sure how the kid did it, but he's pushed all the right buttons to make Shigaraki laugh in malicious excitement. "Fine. Kurogiri, Nomu, back off." "Shigaraki Tomura." Kurogiri tries, but Shigaraki doesn't even spare him a glance. "I said, back off." Kurogiri wordlessly steps back after his attempt, and the Nomu raises its giant body off of Eraserhead to meander off. Shigaraki turns with a grin of his own to face the kid, who somehow manages to look almost serene for all that his smile is more or less a snarl. "Say, what's your name, mini-boss?" The kid blinks, then his lips stretch wider. "Midoriya Izuku." And then a burst of flames comes flying into his face. Izuku grins. He bares his teeth and grins, and uses it in the stead of the mouth guard that's now broken and dangling at his collarbone. He hides behind it like a mask, uses it to bury all his fear and doubts and insecurity of the fire pushing out of him, puts it up as a front to shield himself, and brandishes it like a weapon. He's sure he'll have to have an appropriate breakdown and freak out about, well, everything, once he makes it out of this, if he makes it out of this. For now, though, all he can focus on is the fact that Aizawa has been left alone. He's facing off the leader of villains, and he needs to buy as much time as possible. He can't afford to break down now. The fire had burst out of him like his emotions had physically manifested, but now it's smoldered down back inside of him. Izuku can't afford an outburst like that again, not with Aizawa so close, but he can't just rely on his pull and open himself up to attack when he rides out the consequences either anymore. Instead of pulling, Izuku consciously pushes back a blast of fire out of one hand. Shigaraki dodges out of the way with surprising agility and comes for Izuku with a hand outstretched. But this time Izuku pulls, and Shigaraki stumbles at the momentum, forcing him faster than he'd expected. Izuku thinks he hears the villain hiss "cheat," but ignores it in favor of bringing around his fist to connect with Shigaraki's stomach. The villain coughs, but instead of pulling away, he takes advantage of their closeness to grab at Izuku's face. He pulls himself back, just barely dodging the grasping fingers, and Shigaraki's hand brushes the mouthguard on his collarbone instead. It disintegrates in a matter of seconds. Izuku scrambles back frantically. The broken remnants of his mask fall to the ground with a pitiful clatter. A chill goes through him at the thought that that could have been his face. A burning rage passes through him at the realization that that's what happened to Aizawa's raw and exposed elbow. Shigaraki is flexing his fingers, grinning through the severed hand on his face. Ah, so close. He jumps out of the way as another jet of flames come at him. They continue on like this for a few more tense moments. Izuku is at his limit, not used to using this side of his quirk. Quirks are like muscles, after all, and his are comparable to that of a newborn baby. Finding the balance between push and pull is not easy, especially doing it for the first time in the heat of battle, not to mention that some part of his mind is still freaking out about the fire blazing at his command. He's both mentally and physically straining himself. It's the first time he's actually pushed out the fire instead of having it push out of him, not since that very first time when he was 4 and his mother screamed. And perhaps that thought causes him to slip. Shigaraki closes in again, one finger just barely grazing Izuku's skin. Izuku flings out his left arm in panic and pushes, but instead of the villain dodging the stream of fire like every other time, he recoils with a scream. Izuku freezes. He'd consciously, or perhaps unconsciously, been avoiding aiming the fire directly at the villain, only using it to intimidate and change his course. Because no matter if this is a villain, no matter if he wants to kill All Might, no matter if he broke Aizawa, Izuku would still never wish this fire on anyone. But somewhere in the back of his mind, Hizashi laughs. The familiar smell of burnt flesh hits Izuku's nose. The hand on Shigaraki's face has been knocked off by the blast, and he holds one hand near his burned face, while the other wildly gropes around for it. "Father," he says, and Izuku suddenly is burning. He chokes on a gasp as the fire in his left hand abruptly scorches his palm. He flings his hand away from himself as if trying to shake it off, but in the moment of inattention, Shigaraki has already put the severed hand back on his face and is coming back at Izuku with his hand outstretched. Izuku pulls himself out of the way, but this time doesn't dare follow up with a jet of fire. Shigaraki grins madly through the hand on his face, his eyes glinting and his left cheek red with a burn. "Oh, what's this? Are you burned by your own fire? In that case, change of tactics, Nomu." Shigaraki pivots violently. Izuku's confused for a moment before he realizes that he's headed straight for Aizawa. At the same time, the Nomu awakens from its docile state and springs to action, also headed for the hero from the other side. Izuku's heart stops for a moment. He can only pull one thing at a time, which means he can only stop one of them if he pulls. And just no, whatever fear Izuku has about burning anyone on principle, Shigaraki can't have him. Not Aizawa. Not Eraserhead. Not him. Not him. Not him. One hand grasps out and pulls Shigaraki back, while the other flings forward and pushes a blast of flames at the Nomu. The Nomu shrieks an inhuman sound. Izuku bites his lip as he does his best to ignore it, and is already running to put himself between Aizawa and the villains when he hears Shigaraki's delighted laugh. A warp gate opens up in front of Izuku. His own flames come rushing out of it. Oh shit. So this was his plan. "Checkmate," comes Shigaraki's gleeful voice. Izuku turns back to the flames. Trying to shield Aizawa as much as possible with his own small body, he grits his teeth and waits for the familiar white-hot pain and scorching agony and the burn, burn, burn. But it never comes. A silent beat passes. "That was so cool, Eraserhead," comes Shigaraki's grudging acknowledgement. Izuku opens his eyes to find Aizawa still on the floor with his head barely raised. His eyes are red and looking straight at him. He erased Izuku's quirk. He saved Izuku, again, even while he himself is on the brink of death. A shaky breath escapes Izuku as Aizawa slumps back down, unconscious, his face planting on the floor again. Izuku is trembling from emotions that he can't even name, mouthing words he doesn't even recognize. A sob and a gasp are choked in his throat. He pushes it all down and turns to face the villains again, firmly putting himself between them and Aizawa. Shigaraki is still on the floor where Izuku had deposited him, with his pull, and Kurogiri is hanging in the back, but Nomu is rearing up and screeching. There are still licks of flame charring its skin, yet it still comes dashing towards them. The momentum is so strong that Izuku isn't sure that even the push of fire will stop it. But a hero always has more than one trick up their sleeve, Aizawa had said. In Izuku's case, he has 3. "Sorry, Sensei," he whispers, as he picks up Aizawa as gently as he can. He's wildly glad for all the weight training All Might made him go through in the junk heap as he bears the hero's full weight in his arms. Izuku flicks a one-for-all charged finger in the direction of Shigaraki and Kurogiri, sending a blast of air so that they can't do anything to interfere like last time. He waits for the last moment before the Nomu is upon them, then jumps up and jumps off the Nomu with a one-for-all powered kick. Smash! Gusts of wind billow out and Izuku lands clumsily far from the Nomu, doing his best not to jostle Aizawa. He'd been willing to sacrifice his leg to save Aizawa, even though it would make the fight later on harder, but to his shock his leg isn't shattered. It feels like it's only fractured, maybe. Not that he's complaining. "What? Telekinesis, fire, and now super strength, too. You're a cheat," Shigaraki complains. "I'm the cheat. You're the one who broke the rule of playing one-on-one," Izuku shoots back, not daring to set Aizawa down, lest they come after him again. "But I'm a villain," Shigaraki points out. "Well, fair point." The villain scratches his neck. "Man, I mean, this is fun and all, but you keep getting distracted because of Eraserhead. What are you trying to be, a hero?" Izuku barks out a laugh. He knows he can't be one, not with Hisashi's tainted fire burning at his back. "No, I'm holding on to one, and holding out for another." A boom sounds near the entrance of the USJ, and Izuku's grin widens. "And it looks like I bought just enough time." All Might emerges from the smoke, ripping off his tie with a thunderous scowl. "Have no fear, for I am here." With the Nomu's movements hampered by the numerous burns ridding its body, All Might makes quick work of the artificial human, and with Ida bringing the reinforcements, Shigaraki and Kurogiri have no choice but to retreat by themselves. Shigaraki's eyes glare at All Might as he sinks into the warp gate. "We've failed this time, but we'll get you next time, All Might, symbol of peace. And you," he suddenly turns to Izuku. Shigaraki smiles. "Let's play again." A shiver goes through Izuku. He clutches Aizawa's bloody body to his chest as he stands there, almost numb in the aftershock. The adrenaline comes crashing down, but his senses are still frantic in overdrive, messing up his cognition and dulling his mind. His ears are ringing with Inko's screams and Hisashi's laugh, but his arms are holding one of his heroes. As exhaustion washes over him, he can't think. "Oh my God, Aizawa!" someone calls as they approach quickly with outstretched arms. Somewhere in the back of Izuku's foggy mind, he recognizes him as Present Mic. But the majority of his mind is still running high on survival and protective instincts. What he sees is a threat that's trying to take Aizawa away. And no, not him. Not him. Not him. Izuku bares his teeth and steps back, tightening his arms carefully around Aizawa. Something in his leg makes a resounding snap. He doesn't even flinch. The threat, Present Mic, stops where he still is, evidently noticing that something is wrong. He looks around, then frantically calls some people and waves them over. Izuku stays where he is, trembling slightly, clutching his broken hero protectively. A wave of cement swells in front of Izuku, cutting off everyone else or all other threats. Izuku still doesn't let himself relax, though. But then All Might is there, not buffed up and towering, but skeletal and bloody and crouching to meet Izuku's eyes, without looming over him. In the small, secluded sanctuary of cement, where only he and his heroes are, Izuku finally feels a little less on edge. "Midoriya," All Might calls, and it's hard to tell on that gaunt face, but Izuku thinks he looks almost as emotionally broken as Aizawa's body is. "Midoriya, my boy, it's all right now. You're safe." But Izuku just stares at the hero. It's not that he doubts All Might. Even muddled and swaying on his feet as he is, Izuku still implicitly trusts his hero, but with the broken body of his other hero in his arms, dizzy from coming down from his high, and instincts in overdrive, he just can't understand what All Might is saying. All Might blinks as if he's just realized something, and then looks like he's on the verge of crying. "My boy," he calls again, voice rough and ragged. "He's safe. He's all right. Aizawa, Eraserhead, is safe." And Izuku understands that. He smiles. It's the last thing he remembers. Toshinori is lying quietly on the hospital bed next to young Midoriya's. Aizawa and 13 have been carted away to the hospital. None of the other students have been harmed much, and he and Midoriya have been entrusted to Recovery Girl's care. The nurse tuts from her chair. "You pushed yourself too far. I wouldn't be surprised if your time went down again, though, considering the circumstances, I won't say much more about that right now. What I will say, though, is that you need to start setting a better example for your successor." Toshinori glances over at young Midoriya. He's still unconscious after having passed out at the USJ. According to Recovery Girl, it has less to do with his physical injuries and more to do with the mental and emotional strain he's gone through. The boy's hair is out of its usual tuft of a hair bun, spilling in dark green curls over the pillow. The dark hair contrasts with the pallor of his face, making him look smaller and pale. Something in Toshinori just aches. When it looks like Toshinori isn't going to answer, Recovery Girl continues. He's being smart with One for All, and not throwing it around willy-nilly, but I have a feeling that has less to do with self-preservation and more to do with the fact that it makes him useless after. He already has another self-destructive quirk, and he's been throwing it around without a care for himself. And after what happened today, I'm worried. Recovery Girl sighs as Toshinori keeps gazing at Midoriya, following his gaze. "I see why you chose him. I really do. He's selfless, brave, and caring. But Toshinori, before he's a hero in training, before he's your successor, he's also just a child." The elderly nurse gives Toshinori a look. "He's just like you, in some ways. And Toshinori, while that may be a good thing for a hero, it's not for a person, especially a person you care about." And Toshinori understands. He props himself up on the bed, turning so he can properly face Midoriya. He hears Recovery Girl sighing again in sympathy and compassion, but he doesn't have the presence of mind to properly talk to her right now. Just yesterday, she had told him about Midoriya's scars. She had told him about what she had seen and what she hadn't seen, what she suspected, what it implied. And she had also cautioned him not to approach this subject with Midoriya rashly. Just yesterday, he had been told that his bright, kind, caring heir with a heart of gold has scars that dig deep, deeper than any child should have. Just yesterday, he'd had his heart ache for his protege. And today, His heart feels like it's being slowly and methodically dismantled. He remembers how he found young Midoriya facing off against the three main villains, with an injured Aizawa in his arms, eyes wild and teeth bared in a desperate grin. He remembers all the blood, smoke, and burns that covered his body. He remembers how protective he was of his teacher, even while half unconscious and delirious. He remembers how the boy had only looked relieved at the words that Aizawa, not himself, was safe. All Might understands more than anyone that a hero, that especially the beacon of hope and the symbol of peace, must push aside their own well-being for the sake of others. As the former wielder, he couldn't have made a better choice for his next successor of One for All. But as a mentor, the weight of passing on his duty finally crashes into Toshinori as he realizes that seeing Midoriya as his successor is not the same thing as seeing the boy as his. Just then Midoriya stirs. His lashes start to flutter a few times before blinking blearily up at Toshinori. All Might. Toshinori swallows around the lump in his throat. Yes, my boy. Midoriya stares up at him tiredly as if confused for a moment, but then he beams. I'm glad you're all right. And at that, Toshinori he can't. He should probably say something. He should applaud Midoriya's courage or thank him for weakening the Nomu, and tell the boy that he's so proud of him. But in the end, all he can do is climb over to the boy's bed and envelop the child in his arms. Midoriya stiffens as if not used to being hugged, and that just breaks Toshinori all the more as he cards one hand through the boy's curly hair, falling freely to his chin. It takes a moment, but Midoriya finally wraps his arms around Toshinori as well. He's hesitant, as if unused to physical contact, and also unsure why Toshinori is acting like this all of a sudden. He doesn't care. Toshinori hugs his boy tightly to his chest. They have the next day off from school. Aizawa is let out from the hospital, albeit with bandages covering his entire body, turning him into a mummy. Yamada is here to help him out, cheerily ignoring Aizawa's long-suffering protest that he's just fine. Go on, I'll get your stuff, he grins. You don't want to keep your kid waiting for you, do you? Aizawa blinks. And when he gets down to the hospital lobby, he finds none other than Midoriya Izuku, sitting with his head bowed on one of the waiting chairs. He sighs, then he slowly makes his way over and plops down next to the kid. Midoriya absent-mindedly raises his head and does a double-take. Erase Aizawa-sensei, he gapes. Aizawa notes that the kid's almost called him by his hero name again. Shouldn't you be in bed? And shouldn't you be at home? He returns, slouching and leaning back in the plastic chair. He shuffles his cast so they lie more comfortably on the stomach of his black t-shirt, then peers at Midoriya out of his side of his gaze. They sit in silence for a while. Midoriya doesn't look like he's about to breach a topic so soon. So Aizawa ponders how to go about handling his problem child. He could mention how reckless it was for the kid to try to face 3 of the main villains on his own. He could reprimand him for not leaving Aizawa and getting wounded. Or he could try to get him to talk about that blazing fire he saw when he briefly woke up. So, he begins, you never told me you can use fire. The kid winces. No, I didn't tell you, not that I can't use it. I'm sorry. Aizawa blinks. For what? Midoriya looks up at him with something akin to bewilderment. The fire. I know it can only cause destruction. It's not a quirk that can save anyone. I kept it down for so long, and I never should have used it, but I couldn't think of anything else at that moment. I'm so sorry. And well, that doesn't explain much. Aizawa doesn't understand fully what's going on, but he hasn't been teaching teenagers for years with nothing to show for it. He pieces together what he remembers, and what he's heard since waking up, with what the kid is saying now. It looks like a part of Midoriya's quirk is fire, and he's absolutely traumatized by it. Aizawa was going to scold Midoriya for being so reckless, for having no self-preservation, for valuing a pro's life over his own. But in this moment, he looks at this kid who's hunched over with despair draped over him like a physical weight, who's crushed by insecurity and shame even after having almost single-handedly dealt with the situation after himself and 13 were out of commission, who's just so broken, and realizes that that's not what the kid needs right now. He gives a mental screw the plan. If anyone should be apologizing, it should be me. I failed to protect you, but from what I remember, and especially from what I've been hearing, you saved me. And All Might. The fire weakened the Nomu enough for All Might to be able to pull through, and there wasn't a single burn on me, so Midoriya. Aizawa waits until the kid hesitantly raises his head to meet his eyes. Thank you. He gasps. But you had to save me again, he says disbelievingly. Aizawa files away that again for later. Outwardly he shrugs. It's called teamwork, brat. And I did tell you to find a way around that puking. That was your fire, I presume? He still remembers the burns on the kid's palm, after all. He can make an educated guess. Midoriya nods numbly, and Aizawa gently plops his cast on top of his head. Good to see you take advice to heart. Midoriya slowly raises his hands to the top of his head, all the while staring up at Aizawa like he can't believe he's being praised and thanked. The lost look in his big green eyes makes Aizawa want to do something ridiculous, but thankfully both his arms are in a cast, so he can't physically do anything too touchy-feely. Instead, he lightly rubs at the end of his cast at the top of Midoriya's head in an awkward sort of head pat. I don't know what you think about it, but you saved me and All Might with your fire, Midoriya. You did good. Don't forget that. And for the look that Midoriya gives him, he might as well have told him that he'd hung the moon. Yamada comes back, suspiciously late, with Aizawa's hero costume and other belongings. He grins at Midoriya, and the kid smiles tentatively back. I'm sorry I didn't recognize you yesterday, Present Mike, he says while stooping into a low bow. Yamada waves it off. Don't worry about it. I understand that emotions and instincts can get high in a stressful situation. But then his smile takes on a devilish turn. Though I do wish that I took some pictures while you were holding Aizawa bridal style, Yamada says with a wink. Midoriya sputters. Aizawa blinks. Then he slowly turns to look at his student, as if to say, You did what? Midoriya's face is turning into an impressive shade of red, and he knows the truth without having to hear a word. He can almost picture it, himself slack and unconscious, with Midoriya holding his almost too long form in an awkward bridal style. The mental image is something else. My hero, Aizawa deadpans, and the kid looks like he wants to sink right into the earth. Aizawa lowers his head to hide his grin in the folds of his bandages. This concludes Chapter 6 of Burn Your Wings. I'll be back with the next update as soon as possible. As always, thank you guys so much for listening.